Introduce our wonderful speakers today. Da, da, da. Okay, so I don't know if this is the order they'll be speaking in, but I guess you could say hi once I say your name, so they'll be able to
I think
identify
just
you.
do it in alphabetical order of last name. How about that?
Okay, I'll have to figure that out. Okay, so first is Dr. Anne Marie Albano, professor of medical psychology in psychiatry and founder of the Columbia University Clinic for Anxiety in New York, aka QCARD. Sound advice for parenting children with anxiety can be found in her book, You and Your Anxious Child, and her soon-to-be-released TED Med Talk. That's very exciting. And I guess any kind of resources you guys... Stop the show, okay. Okay, Jonathan Kaplan, PhD, serves as the founding director of Soho CBT and Mindfulness Center, and author of the Urban Mindfulness Cultivating Peace, Presence, and Purpose in the Middle of It All. Dean McKay, Dr. Dean McKay, PhD, professor of psychology at Fordham University and past president of the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies and the Society for Science of Clinical Psychology. Rebecca Sachs is a clinical psychologist specializing in autism spectrum, OCD, and severe anxiety. She brings warmth, sensitivity, and a strong sense of humor, which you will have seen in the last talk, while working with individuals of all ages, including parenting work. And I'm Dr. Elliot Kamenetsky, founder of My OCD Care. I'm really excited for this talk. I think ultimately there are unique challenges during this time, and anxiety is a very normal and understandable emotions. And the challenge is what happens when, the thing that we're anxious about is, something that's not, something that's a real challenge. So without further ado, Dr. Anne Marie Albano. Who's talking first?
I'm gonna sort of introduce
All right, awesome.
And I think actually this is a great illustration of probably what life is already starting to look like, is going to look like. Kids in the background, phones ringing, not knowing where things are because we might be in different spaces. And one thing that I'd like to stress today is something that I stress during more typical times, and this idea of flexibility. And I think probably all the panelists love that word flexibility, and we use it often. And I think probably we're going to get it tattooed on our foreheads and on our t-shirts, and we're going to ask that of you guys. If we can always just channel sort of this idea of flexibility, that's probably one of the big things that's going to carry us through the next day, the next week, the next month. And it's sort of nicely illustrated right now in the past couple minutes. What we're really hoping to do today is give sort of an introduction to some like core ideas and even some strategies that I think we all really deeply believe in. And the reason why we deeply believe in them is because we do them constantly with our patients. And we also know that we have a lot of really good like research and evidence that shows that these like concepts actually work. They're proven to work. And so they're proven to work in sort of everyday situations. They're proven to work when people have more serious sort of like mental health challenges. And I think they're proven to work in sort of these unprecedented situations that we're living through right now. And that's really the nice thing. And so what we're hoping to do is introduce these concepts, be able to relate them to some very, very day-to-day challenges as we're seeing information and sort of our reality change very quickly, and also sort of be a resource or a stepping stone to how you can start asking questions, getting some questions answered, and starting to like collaboratively problem solve how beyond today people can start to access resources and good information when they feel like there's a need. Because I think even the most mentally healthy person who has good supports and a good foundation, these are going to be sort of emotionally trying times for us, and to know where we can go for good information and support is going to be helpful. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today is how do you in general just cope with all of this uncertainty, especially since the news changes sort of hour to hour, day to day, and from slightly different lenses, what can we do for that? There's this idea of, as our lifestyles are constantly changing and the things that used to give us meaning and purpose, how do we sort of reorient our ship and know that in these ways that used to give us a lot of pleasure and meaning, and maybe we can't access those things as readily, how do we still not just sort of go through the motions in the next couple of weeks, but how do we still have life feel really, really meaningful and infused with purpose? I think the other thing is we want to make sure we're preventing feelings of hopelessness and depression. And we know the more people become isolated, or the more that they sort of do less in life or less active, we can set ourselves up for those things. So we're going to talk about proactive strategies to, again, sort of think about resilience. How do we not fall into that hopeless, helpless, sad, depressed trap? And then last but not least, we have an ambitious agenda. How do we sort of maintain that balance? We know schools are closed, at least in New York City, the public schools are closed until April 20th. So in some ways, not putting too much pressure on ourselves that we have to have the perfect schedule and maintain life exactly as is. So balancing like a little bit of vacation and leaning back and figuring out what is day to day, but also understanding that structure and consistency are often probably some of the healthiest things that we can provide our children. And how do we sort of balance those two things? Yes, and that's my daughter waking up from her nap if you hear her. So let's start off with this idea of coping with uncertainty and the anxiety. If any one of you guys want to like maybe start in and say like generally, or Dean, if you want to start in, like, what do we know about like how people in general tend to deal with uncertainty and anxiety? And if you want to then like build on top of that, what people can be like thinking about in a new way as we go through these uncertain days.
So the floor, I guess, has been turned over to me. Thank you.
No, not to put you on the spot, but I guess I put you on the spot.
No, that's all good. It's all good. So, if we start in a more general way, there is a variation in the population on how readily people tolerate uncertainty. So we already know that people who might be more likely to feel anxious, separate and apart from times of crisis, like a pandemic, like what we're experiencing now, if it's difficult for you to tolerate uncertainty, you're probably going to feel anxious about occasions where there is some imprecision in the kind of information that you have in your life. Expanded out at the population level, most people don't like uncertainty in a general way. And so what we're seeing now is what this looks like when it's at a population level. We're hearing about the viral aspect around COVID-19 extends also to the viral nature of an emotional reaction to loss of certainty. And so one of the ways that we can try to cope with it that might be of value is to think about what are the trusted sources of information that you might have access to. You're going to be bombarded by a lot of data, some of it on social media where we already know that much of it is of questionable quality. So really the task for most people is to identify one or two or maybe three solid, reliable sources and use those as your guideposts for making decisions in your daily life about what will constitute safe behavioral activity, how are you going to handle yourself in terms of going out, and what distance you're going to keep from other people. There are some good bits of information out there that once you follow them may not necessarily lead to the kind of alarm that you'll get if you are going to be bombarded by information that is going to be often, frankly, contradictory. And this includes information that we may get from leaders in our communities. And so you'll really want to think carefully about who you listen to. I'm really being careful not to get political with this. And so this is not intended to be a political statement, but really think carefully about whom you're listening to and how you're going to use that information and moving forward in your day-to-day life. I'll turn the floor over to whomever else would like to build on that.
And then, or if, yeah, I'll wait for you guys to chime in. And if not, I have questions maybe to ask on that.
Sure.
Well, I think to jump on with you, Dean, there are so many sources of information that are coming in and people are exposed to, as you said, and I would just lay it out there. And again, with all due respect to your best friends, uncles, cousins, sister, whatever, or whatever channel you're looking at, what have you, this is the place, this kind of a situation is where we really need to listen to our nation's and the world's top scientists and doctors. And right off the bat, when we want to challenge anxious thinking and we need factual information, I'd say the place you're going to go and need to go is the WHO, and they've been putting out tremendous information for schools, for families, for communities. The WHO, and then our CDC, and then locally, call your trusted family physician. So, I mean, that's just number one. And then we do have to listen to our local leaders, especially because you need to know what's going on in your community. What's open, what's closed, where to get help if you need it. So this is, gathering facts that are credible and can be reliable and you can trust is so important. So okay, we've said that, we can move on from that then.
Anne-Marie, what would you advise parents on like how to talk to kids who they're hearing the TV on, or they talk to their friend on like Skype, or like they're seeing things posted on social media and their kids are starting to feel alarmed and worried and having difficulty sleeping or asking a lot of questions? What would be sort of guidance on how parents should sort of flag their children's own sort of coping with this uncertainty, or not knowing if there was school the next day and then not knowing how long they're going to be out of school?
Yeah, well, let me do this. Maybe I'll see if I can share my screen for a second. Let's see how this works. Nope, it doesn't work. Never mind. The first thing I would say to do is the very first thing a parent has to do is stop, take a deep breath, check your own anxiety and concern, and you really have to get into a mindful state of, being more calm and matter of fact. Your kids are going to come running to you. What's happening? They say people who are older, is Nana and Papa okay? What are we going to do? We need to help them. You have to stay calm. All right. And so that's the very first thing is it is important for you to have factual information and for you not to go down the rabbit hole of getting into catastrophizing. This is the worst thing that can happen. We just, we've been seeing these things going around the internet, the idea that our grandparents went through wars, big ones, right? We are going through something that we're getting information about, that we can take steps to, and that we can manage to the best we can and make use of local, resources. So number one thing is you have to stay calm. And then you have to listen to your child and validate. Yeah, they're getting information too from all over the place. And they're hearing it from the kids who are translating what they might not understand from adults and from websites and such. So listen, validate that, yeah, this is a time when it's high anxiety, but let me know what you're hearing. What do you think is happening? So that you understand what it is they're actually worried about. Then you can give them factual information and be matter of fact. And one of the things that parents get very worried about is, how am I going to get my 3-year-old, my 7-year-old, my 10-year-old to stop touching their face, to wash their hands? And, one of the best things that really works is praising and complimenting them when you see them doing those things. So catch them in the moment. And trying as best you can not to lecture them, but ignoring if they, touch their face, and then just maybe wipe their hands if you see they had touched something and wipe their face, but don't lecture them about it. More importantly is praising them when they are, oh, thank you for washing your hands. That was a good job, and that. So that's going to be one of the things. And the best thing too, is making routines at home. Like people might have seen that Elliot is not in the room right now with us because he's tending to the kids. You've got to be flexible. Your Skype meetings with your boss are not going to go smoothly. Some little one might need you. Kids are going to be fighting in the background, but stick to the routines. They might not be in school, but stick to a school day routine, and that getting them up, getting them breakfast, having them do some of the schoolwork that's being sent home, but have activities for them. The more routine they could get, the better it can be. And then getting them outside to play.
Yeah. The thing I'll add, and then if you want to add something.
And there's more later, but I want the guys to talk and you to talk.
The only other thing that I would add is, so kids don't often come to us and say, like, I'm anxious, I'm worried. I would say adults in general aren't really good at communicating that. Kids are either going to do sort of like that whiny behavior or clingy behavior or sort of tantrumy behavior, or other ways that they let us know that they're anxious. Something hurts, their belly hurts, their head hurts. So sort of knowing that and deciphering that might be ways that kids are letting us know that they're feeling a little worried. That's when we sort of can get down and rub their back and sort of ask them if we can, is everything okay? Or maybe just sort of says, I think maybe you're worried, and that's okay to feel that emotion. Just a baseline, if we remember HALT, HALT, kids are often not set up for success when they're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And so I always like to think when my kid is like not acting the way I would like her to act, I halt and then say, are one of these 4 things going on? And so like even today, she was getting whiny. And then we realized, oh my goodness, it's lunchtime, because we didn't have that structure in place yet. Magically, as soon as she sat down to eat, like things changed. And that's a thing that I think can carry us through as well, as we're sort of dealing with these changes and uncertainty.
Yes. And little ones will get irritable. Little ones can get whiny. And you'll see somatic complaints, headaches, stomach aches, and such across the ages. But the older kids could get really irritable and antsy. And we do have to give our older kids, teenagers, they need to socialize. So they will need to see their friends on social media. And also I've been talking with a lot of parents through the weekend whose kids are coming home. Yeah. Make time, talk to one another, the parents of the other kids, make sure that nobody is symptomatic or such, so that you can arrange small gatherings at your house, or let your kid go to a friend's house where you trust and let them, do things with their friends. They have to be able to do that, but do it safely and talk about how to do that.
And I have a specific question for you, Jonathan, but I want to give you a chance to say your thoughts.
Well, I love what folks have been sharing so far. A couple things that I might add in terms of how we are with our kids, depending how old they are and depending how communicative they are. One thing that I like sometimes is the talk out loud strategy. So if they're not communicating about potential worries or concerns, like for us to be able to voice things that we're feeling reassured about, like facts that give us some comfort, and just kind of share it openly, not even necessarily directly in a conversation, but just to be talking about it. Second, I also find that there can be teachable moments too, in terms of how we as parents work with our own emotions. I mean, obviously this might not be appropriate for very young kids, but being able as parents to model appropriate self-care, like being able to share too, like maybe we're feeling a little bit afraid or we're feeling a little bit anxious, and that's normal and it's natural. And one of the nice things that we know about emotions is that they have a tendency to come and they stay and they go. Right? So there's an opportunity for us to actually narrate that process in real time as it's happening for ourselves and also with them.
Great. Cool. I guess moving on to this next idea of how do we still find purpose and meaning as everything is shifting. If you want to, if you don't mind, Jonathan, sort of speaking a little bit to maybe ways that we can start that.
Sure. I actually prepared a little bit something today. So let's see if I can get this going.
Oh, you're much better with this than I am. Wow.
Is it working?
Yep.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'll share a little bit here, but essentially this is an opportunity for us to continue to reflect on this question of what gives our life meaning. It can be applicable for us as individuals. It can be applicable for us as parents. It can even be applicable for us as an entire family unit. And one thing that I thought was important to point out is that anxiety, fear, and worry are not values, right? They might be things that are very present for us or for our kids or our neighbors, our loved ones, but they're really reactions to what's going on, to the pandemic, to the spread of COVID-19, but they're not values. So for this reason, I think it's helpful to be aware of like what place we're acting from. Like, are we acting from a place of anxiety and fear and worry, or are we acting from a place that's more representative of our own personal values? And in this way, I see values as, for all of us, being these important principles that act as guidance for how we're leading our lives. Are they things that are intrinsically motivational and rewarding, and ultimately reflect our own choices and act as prompts for action? So even when we're feeling stressed or anxious or afraid or worried, we can still act from a valued place. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy necessarily, but we're still in this position of being able to do what matters to us, at least try to make that effort. I thought I'd share just a partial list of values. And when I talk about values, I usually think of them as very positive, very aspirational for us. They can be things like kindness and love and gratitude and openness and creativity. There's many, many different things that can matter to us and provide meaning. And in particular, for what we're struggling with now in terms of this pandemic, I had a few values that maybe we could try on relative to what we're dealing with. The first is being able to extend compassion, sympathy towards people who have been adversely affected by the virus, instead of what might be a more like visceral reaction of fear or disgust. We might also express gratitude and appreciation for the people who are actively helping us. And by this, I mean not just the healthcare workers who undoubtedly deserve our support, but also the grocery store cashier, the delivery people, like all the people who are actually enabling us, at least here in New York, to like continue to have some semblance of a normal life, despite the fact that many of us are working from home and practicing social distancing. We might also play around a little bit with the idea of interconnectedness, recognizing that we're all in this together, and maybe even doing something to help other people. Obviously, it's an opportunity to be creative and flexible in providing innovative ideas for how we do our work, how we help our children, maybe how we help them adjust to life without school. And finally, I wanted to mention that it's a good opportunity also to try on a social justice framework, if we don't have this already, trying to counteract any hateful speech or actions directed against people because of their race, ethnicity, or nationality, and maybe even taking action to help people who don't have the same advantages or privileges that you have.
Great. Excellent.
Got just a couple more, if that's okay. I wanted to share just some value-based activities. I think this might be the last one. And these are things that we can do as individuals. It might also be things that we can do as a family. For example, over dinner, inviting a discussion about what makes a good life, even during these difficult times. One of the things I used to do when I led groups with families is that we would have people draw a coat of arms that showed what their family stood for. And it'd be some kind of symbol with different quadrants of ideas or pictures that would represent some of the values that I've been talking about. We might also recognize that part of living our values involves flexibility and also accommodating some discomfort. So even when we're feeling stressed or even when we're feeling anxious, maybe we can still live from a valued place and trying to figure out how we might do that. Doop. All right, I will stop share.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Amber and Dean, do you have anything to add, or even like a personal story on like how you feel like you've been doing values in your own life as you're practicing social distancing?
Well, you know, one of the things that that I've talked to a lot of parents over the weekend about, because you know, I run an anxiety clinic here in town, and I'm opening one in Charleston. That's something we'll talk about another time. But parents are saying, what am I going to do with the kids? You know, this is terrible. And what Jonathan just said, these are the types of activities that are perfect for your children to engage in. Thinking about what our family stands for, having them draw the coat of arms. But also, one of the things that happens is when you're feeling out of control, which we are, and you're feeling that things are not predictable, you don't know when, where, and how this is going to hit close to home. One of the things kids can do is they can make art, draw simple drawings. They can write letters or make cards to send to people that they are concerned about the most, who may not be able to come visit grandparents, folks in nursing homes, family members or friends who are ill. This gives us a sense of purpose and also allows us to participate in a way that's meaningful and we do have control over. So it's a wonderful activity, and it is values-based. It also helps to manage the anxiety and then becomes part of something that the kids can feel good about as they're going forward, and so can you as a parent. Dean?
So
Yeah.
Rebecca had, you know, I guess also if there were any personal anecdotes. And so, you know, one of the things, I don't know that I'm necessarily a paragon of mindful life experiences and living by example. So I appreciate the call out. Anne-Marie and I both have begun kind of demonstrating in a public way, one small way in which we've been trying to appreciate some of the more small things in our lives that are daily experiences, like having dinner with family and sharing that on social media.
Yeah.
And so, not that you have to share your life with the world, but you know, there are certain things that I think in a busy life, and given that we live in a society that is quite stressed, and to tie this back to the research that's been going on, the APA has been doing surveys of stress in America for the last several years. And what
APA is the American Psychological Association.
Right, sorry, yes, the American Psychological Association. And so if you go to apa.org and you search on stress in America, you'll find the results of their surveys over the last several years. And most of you watching this will probably not be surprised to hear that the stress of the public has been going up. It is not in any way directly related to political party affiliation, although politics plays a role in it. I'm highlighting the politics part because many people now are stressed by that, and there's a downward flow to that into our children's lives. If we're feeling stressed about just watching the news and hearing the latest reports on activities that are happening in the world, and it's particularly acute during a pandemic, because pandemic fears, the research has shown, is driven partially by the extent to which we trust that our leaders are handling it effectively. And if we feel that the information we're getting from our leaders is inaccurate, then that fuels that sense of uncertainty. And that's what really informed that comment I made at the beginning. It connects nicely to what Jonathan was pointing out about values and how to try and take a step away from this and think about what matters most to you, because that's one way that you can help insulate yourself from this, and also to not get caught up in all the stress that might happen that will feel very much out of control for you. So the one other more personally driven anecdote, and it's not me personally, but some research that my lab has been doing over the last couple of years, is that political stress can sometimes be managed by the degree that you feel in some way that you can regulate your own emotional state. And so one way that you can accomplish that is through the kinds of value-based actions that Jonathan talked about. And if you have children at home, just the day-to-day life with children, especially young children, can already feel kind of out of control. And so if you start to think about how your day-to-day life is informed by your own values, you can begin to at least feel that you have a measure of regulation over your day-to-day life. And it can be reassuring, and that's the kind of thing that you're looking for in some small way. And so things like just making sure that you have dinner together actually can be a source of considerable reassurance. It's a time where you're going to sit down, and historically and culturally through generations, people breaking bread together is one way that people feel calm. And so if you can do that regularly and you make a point of scheduling it, setting aside the time to do so, then things like that can really make a tremendous difference.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that and then maybe change the topic a little bit, because I think it's also just like looking at small details of your day-to-day life and deciding how do you want to choose to do that detail. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to choose to do that detail, but besides, not to pick on you, Dean, besides breaking bread, I think one of the things that struck people about your dinners is how nicely the table is always like done with like the tablecloths and the nice napkins, and deciding, hey, this is a choice on that I want to like add a little finer detail to breaking bread. It's not just going through this motion. And I've even seen like one of my friends on Facebook said like, do you put on makeup and do your hair, or do we say like throw in the towel for the next month? And I think like either one is an awesome option. It depends on sort of what your choice wants to be. Is it, I want to choose comfort and spending my time on other things and not spending like an extra 15, 30 minutes doing my hair and putting on my makeup, and I'd rather, you know, spend that? Or is it, no, I feel like doing my hair and putting on my makeup gives me a sense of like normalcy, or I still just like the way I look, or looking attractive for a partner, and that's a detail that's important to me. It's just, I think, this awareness of these small little choices that we get to make, and how do we sort of connect back to those choices in this thing. So yeah. Okay, so maybe to change a little bit is I'm gonna sort of put on my lecture hat just for like 2 seconds and say one of the things that we know from a lot of good research is this idea of how mood and energy level and activity level can be connected. That what we find is that we can wake up sort of really exhausted and have a bad night's sleep and feel tired. And those are the days that probably our mood's feeling a little lower and we're less likely to go out and be busy. Or we wake up in a foul mood, feeling a little hopeless or down. And again, those are the days where we're feeling tired, and those are the days that we're going to do less. But then we are in this situation where I typically explain, like, we have hip surgery, and for no other reason, we're laid up in bed and we can't be as active as we typically are. And what we tend to find over time, the less active we are, we find that our mood drops, and also that our energy level paradoxically drops as we're sort of just like sitting and doing nothing. And it's just something that I want to point out, that as sort of the ways that we're active and busy are probably going to be constrained, and we're going to have to think more creatively that yes, there's a time and a place for enjoying sitting down and reading a book and watching TV, but to make sure that indefinitely we know sort of the interplay of these things. And I tell people that you can't just say, turn that frown upside down. And there's a limit to how much caffeine you can have. So it's hard to really target mood, and it's hard to target energy level. But the one thing that we can target in sort of this preventative way is we can target activity level. And so I just sort of wanted to throw out there to you guys, how do you think people can still keep busy and active in this proactive way that we know it affects energy and mood, given sort of our new lifestyle constraints?
So I might start, and I guess as a segue out of the prior portion around values. So, you know, a personal value for me is around being active. And so I would say that I think probably like so many things in our lives, it may really be essential to schedule it.
Yeah.
That this is something that one has to deliberately carve out the time for. And if a day goes by that for some reason that schedule got disrupted, that you make a point of trying in every way possible to make it happen the next day. Things are going to be very disrupted. And because most humans are creatures of habit, we are less stressed when we have a habitual routine. And so now that all of that is probably turned upside down, if your kids are home now because school is out for the foreseeable future, if you have to now work from home and try to manage that as well, doing something where you carve out the time that will be for yourself, whether it be that you're making a point of exercising or you go for a walk, or when the weather is agreeable that you just sit outside for a brief period of time, really deliberately scheduling it and making it like sacrosanct that
Yeah.
this must happen, might be one of the essential ingredients in order to make it through a difficult time like this.
Yeah, I think, the other thing that we know from literally 55, 60 years of research that Peter Lewinson and his group started, and Greg Clark and Paul Rohde has continued. These are colleagues and icons of ours in our field of psychology, is that there is a very definite relationship between activity and mood. And the thing, though, is we know, and Jonathan, you could probably speak about this in a minute more, about the mind and body are so connected. And really, there is a need for movement in various ways. But people also have to think about there's different types of activities that are associated with your mood improving and you being in a more open and calm and positive mood. One being there's success activities. There are things that you could do at home that maybe you've been putting off, cleaning a closet or what have you. Well, now that you have more time at home, maybe you could take some of those on at times when the kids are napping. But there's success activities, including helping the kids get their schoolwork done that was sent home to them or should be home with them, and doing some of your work. There's social activity, and where we have to social distance, we're on the social networking and media and such. There's many ways to still be social with others. So you could do that. So social, success activities, there's relaxation and self-soothing activities. And the number one thing that we throw away when we're anxious or when we're down is self-soothing. We need to learn how to calm ourselves and how to treat ourselves well, whether it's a hot, steamy shower that makes you feel good, or it's doing progressive muscle relaxation or yoga. These kinds of soothing activities, listening to music, playing music, reading a book, these are so important. And then there's just pleasant activities. Playing a board game instead of sitting on a video game, playing a board game with someone. Just every night before my husband and I go to sleep, every night we play cards. We just sit and we play gin rummy and we just laugh and talk. Something just, different kinds of pleasant activities to enjoy. So activity could be in many ways, but I'm going to throw it to Jonathan because I want to hear what you have to say about mind, body activities and all that.
Oh, Anne-Marie, I feel like you've covered it so well already. I love the shout out for the self-care, the self-nourishing activities, the things that we can do to help relax us, especially at a time like now. Like, our nervous system needs that. And we also know from the research that by lowering our stress and anxiety, it actually strengthens our immune system. So for
Yes.
people concerned about their own physical health, if you want to do some of these things, the shower, the bath, dare I suggest even meditation, which maybe I'll talk about a little bit later. There's so much that we can do, even if we're practicing social distancing and even if we're housebound. One thing that I might invite as well, because in that there's opportunities for us as well, depending on the age of our kids, to involve them in the activities too. So to share, for example, like, I have a pretty consistent exercise regimen that perhaps, like Dean, I'm gonna adhere to and consider sacred. And I've sort of already merged it with my kids who are school aged
Good.
and their time at the gym and phys ed, right? So now it's going to be, we're going to have this collaborative workout together yet. Haven't worked out the details of what we're going to do, but they know, like Tuesday and Thursday, they're going to have 45 minutes of gym with dad. I was like, okay, all right, that's what we're doing.
Great.
Yeah, and so just, and then to add on that one final thing, but like a slightly different shift is, so I'm a big believer in sort of like daily life skills, and that they're just as important, if not even more important to success for our kids as academics, is how do they like take care of themselves. And so like I work with a lot of kids who go off to college, who have gotten straight A's, who are getting into top tier universities, but don't know how to like make soup, don't know how to do their laundry. And
Or
so,
wake up to an alarm clock.
yes.
Right?
And so I think we actually have this very fabulous opportunity that
Yeah.
like in the house, that maybe school is going to be a little disruptive. Maybe academics are going to not go how we always envisioned, but that we can actually have our kids enter the school of life at home, and we can be teaching our kids really amazing, like sustaining skills that they're gonna need for the rest of their lives. And so one, we can teach them skills and feel like we're really doing a good job parenting and setting our kids up in the midst of all this. Two, the more we get our kids to be involved, the more we don't have to be doing all the laundry, all the cooking, all the cleaning up after dinner. And like maybe when they go back to school, we don't have to be the human alarm clock. Like we can start to even proactively reduce our own burden, which leaves us more time to play cards or go for a walk on our own. And then once again, it's this idea of getting moving and activity for ourselves and for our kids, because there was just one interesting study that looked at cleaning staff. When they looked at cleaning staff who thought about them cleaning hotel rooms and thought about it as just their job, or thought about it as their job and physical exercise. And what they ended up finding out is when people thought about it as this is a form of physical activity and exercise as well, they actually found people lost weight and on sort of like medical measures performed much better when they were doing the same work. So it's like, seems mind-blowing, but if we start to think about these things as like not just sort of doing the chores around the house, but like doing something very, very meaningful with our kids, we might also see that, again, it gives us this emotional lift in our activities. So
well, I've got to tag on to that because, and just so people know, Rebecca and I share, we refer back and forth, young adults, adolescents and young adults. And this is actually a critical time with the kids being home from school. For parents who have youth who tend to be a bit more anxious or tend to be more moody and depressed, there's more of the chance that a parent will step in and try to make that youth so much more comfortable, do more things for them, just to keep peace in the house. And actually what you're saying, Rebecca, is so critical. We have to help kids become independent. And, you know, this is part of what I say in almost every talk. Alfred Adler, the old analyst who was brilliant, you know, from the 30s, said the moment a child is born, you have to start training them to be independent. You have to help them to, you know, stand on their own 2 feet and not get the impression that you're at their beck and call. And from the littlest ages, from the age of 3, you can teach a child to put, you know, their toys away. My granddaughter, who is 15 months just about, she's fit and toddling around and starting to say words. She was here last weekend and found the bottom drawer in my kitchen, which is filled with Tupperware, which is fine. And she's pulling them all out and, you know, handing them to people. And her mom was great. Emily, her mom, is like, okay, now bring it back and put it back in the drawer. So this is a 15-month-old can learn how to put things away. It's so important because it increases their self-confidence and feelings that they're capable of managing things, right? And not just gets independence for you, but it builds their confidence in themselves. So think about it, whatever age and stage your child is at, and they're home with you, even the college kids, what can they and should be they should be doing for themselves, and also to pitch in with you all. Right now, the community is shrunk into your house.
Yeah.
What roles do we all share in being together much more than we're used to, so that we live cooperatively, we respect one another, we pull weight where we can of our own, so that everybody can get along better. This is a great model for what their lives are to be when they grow up.
Yeah, and I think we've sort of like naturally shifted into this idea of how do we balance being on vacation and maintaining structure and consistency for ourselves and our kids. So if people want to sort of add to that idea, sort of knowing we are going to be working from home, how do we do our jobs, or maybe do our jobs imperfectly because we're balancing our own structure and consistency, and like, what does that mean in terms of self-compassion? And then how do we have this idea of how much effort do we spend keeping our kids on task with their schoolwork or other things? People just want to speak to some of those ideas. So.
Well, I don't know how other folks would think about this, but I love the idea of being collaborative and coming up with like the structure of the day. Like, and especially here in New York, where they've now closed schools for a month, it's really important for kids at home to start like having some consistent structure. Presumably instruction is going to start up in a week or so, but even with this week, like, it's not necessarily like a week-long snow day, right? And especially if they can't go outside and they can't be with their friends. So inviting them into a discussion about some of the things that we've been talking about, whether it's activities for the home, whether it's activities for the family, whether it's things that they might want to learn, whether it's like some of the values activities I was mentioning earlier. I love this idea of really empowering them to share ideas for the family and to get everybody involved. And maybe, Rebecca, this sort of dovetails with what you're talking about. So it's not just like us providing answers or instructions to them, but actually inviting them into the process so that we can do this together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts, or?
Do we have questions?
Oh,
By the way,
is Elliot there or no? He was.
yeah,
here's
Oh, wait,
Elliot.
there you are. Hey.
It's there.
Yeah, this is a good place to maybe take some questions before we get to maybe like the final topic. Great.
Because I see a question that I'm trying to multitask here, Elliot, and sort of be like you with the technology. I'm going to fail miserably, I'm sure. Hunter asks, my friend from Twitter asked, how can I prevent depression in a teenager that's happened before?
Okay.
Because things are being canceled, spring musicals, sports, etc. She's not able to see friends. So how can I prevent that? That's one. And then there's a second part. How can I explain to a preschooler why she can't go back to school without scaring her? Those are two great questions.
Great. I may give my impressions on both, and then people add in, because, so the first one, I think, oh, Elliot, you're muted. Are you muted, or did I mute you?
We don't hear you, Elliot.
We don't hear you, Elliot. Hit unmute.
Oh, okay. I said I'll text you, Rebecca, with some questions that I've gotten, and could you pose it to the group just because I'm jumping around here?
Yeah.
All right, great, excellent.
Great. So the first question is, how do you prevent depression? So this is not the complete answer, and I think people will add a lot more. But to me, I think hope and optimism are some of the strongest antidotes to depression. And what I mean by that is not like unicorns and rainbows, hope and optimism. What I mean is really looking at the root of two things. One is, nothing is permanent. As much as this feels like indefinite and permanent, I honestly believe we don't know when, but we know that it's if. I mean, we know it's going to happen. We know at some point we're going to go back to our homes if we left them, or we're going to go back to our schools if we left them, and we're going to go back to our jobs if we left them. We're going to go back to somewhat of our old routines and our old patterns. And so all of these wonderful activities that we feel like we're losing right now, I would say is we're losing these things temporarily. We may be actually gaining some things, and that's a whole nother story. But the idea of this is not forever, this is for the time being. And really, I think emphasizing that fact. The other thing is really emphasizing the fact, as much as this feels difficult, challenging, not what any of us would have chosen, scary, that at the end of the day, I think we all can handle it. Like how I think we even said at the beginning, our grandparents went through war. I'm sure nobody woke up and said, well, looking forward to going to that battlefield. That's exactly what I would have chosen. I'm sure they were scared too. But they all sort of went in knowing that this war wasn't going to last forever, and that this idea of this is hard, this is going to really stink, but we're strong. And I think also this idea, and as a family, we're even stronger together. So knowing that we can handle it, I think really sort of, again, doing that talk out loud in moments when we catch ourselves sort of thinking hopelessly or down, verbalizing, oh, I had this thought, and at the end of the day, I realized this isn't going to be forever, and that this is tough, but I can handle it, and I can handle it even better because we're stronger as a family. So sort of saying those things out loud. For your preschooler, what I would say without scaring her is this is where we can actually go to a great tool that works well for a lot of autistic kids or kids on the spectrum. And it's something called social stories, that if you Google Carol Gray social stories, what it does is it introduces to individuals this idea of a new or uncomfortable situation where it lets people know what to expect, what they might be feeling, and sort of then talking them through. And so actually there are some really great social stories already out there on coronavirus. So if you Google that, you can. I think also I've recently, if you follow me on Twitter, I've tried to put a couple up there. I have a feeling that there are going to be more social stories coming out. Like what does it mean that I can't go back to school? If not, maybe I'll even try to tweet one out this week of some of the basics and how. But I think that's a nice way, if you look at that, is just basically sort of being simple and matter of fact of saying, you know, sometimes unexpected things happen that can change our routine. One of the unexpected things is there can be a virus that can get people sick. We may not like not being able to go back to school or to Gymboree or to wherever we want to go, but we can do other things that are fun. We do this because it keeps everybody healthy and it helps fight the virus. We all feel good when we're keeping people healthy and fighting the virus. And like something to that effect is a way that we can use social stories to explain it to a younger child. So yeah, if people want to then chime in for those other two questions.
So one of the things that struck me with, especially the first one, if you have a teenager who has suffered with depression in the past, and what the kids are lamenting is that I was on the phone all weekend again with several of my clients who are at college, everything's being canceled. And, when is the time of life when you have no other responsibilities but to have fun, spring break or in any kind of school vacation? So if you can't see your friends, if you're locked in. So some of the things that I've heard some parents doing is having the teens, let's say, connect with their friends and doing a social, like watching Netflix at the same time while being on social media together, and everybody has popcorn in their own homes, and they're, and so you're making it sort of like this Zoom call here, or this webinar, getting them together, opening up a Zoom account and letting them, hang out online in that kind of a way, but, so that they can see one another. The other thing is literally walking through Prospect Park yesterday, there were families and kids all over the place. And what I noticed is they were keeping distance with one another. There are things that sound silly, but they can rollerblade without touching one another, or, they can hula hoop in the park without touching one another. There's ways that they still can get together. And this is some of the stuff what I would say to this person who asked about this teen, thinking about the things she likes to do, how can she make some of those things happen, where look at what they're doing in Italy and Spain. Every day at a certain hour, they're going out on their balconies and they're singing, right? So get a bunch of kids together in a park to sing. Yeah. Why not? That is not going to harm them. So I think that's the thing, is helping the kids to think more flexibly and how to be connected, because it's so important to youngsters to be connected to their friends.
Jonathan, do you want to talk a little bit about meditation? Because I feel like it can definitely be a tool that a family can do together, or that a team can do when they're feeling like strong waves of negative emotions, including depression, and maybe some resources online that are free for people who are sort of newbies to meditation.
Sure. Happy to share. So meditation, as we know, is very helpful in reducing stress, reducing anxiety, and strengthening the immune system, especially when it's done consistently and regularly. Starting to practice at a time like now could be difficult for folks, if they don't have any prior experience. And especially if they're feeling particularly anxious or fidgety. So for people that are starting from that place, usually what I'll advise are more movement-oriented meditations. So like doing a walking meditation, or where you pay attention to the sensations of movement in the body, or doing something like yoga or qigong, something where you can actually like focus in on the physical aspects of the practice, can be very helpful. For people who either have a meditation practice or might be interested in trying something that can be a little bit more challenging, there's a meditation known as RAIN. It's an acronym that stands for Recognize, Allow, Investigate with Kindness, and Nurture. And it's essentially a meditation that can be used for dealing with difficult emotions. I will put one sort of asterisk caveat that for folks who are struggling with sort of intense depressive thoughts, that practicing meditation can actually be contraindicated, in that if people are trying to do like a seated meditation, that actually they just end up ruminating on all kinds of negativity. And so it might not be the best place to start, especially if somebody is currently depressed. But having said that, if that's not the case, if you are feeling sort of stressed and anxious, or you'd like to give this a try and just see what happens, there are great resources out there, many good apps. There's Headspace. I think 10% Happier now is making resources free related to the coronavirus. I personally like Insight Timer a lot. Calm is another great meditation app. And if there are meditation centers in your community, a lot of them now are moving to offering teachings and sessions online. So there's a lot of good content out there.
Dean, did you have anything to add to the two questions, or?
No, I think what was said probably covered it adequately.
Okay.
I have nothing more to add. That was great what
Sure.
you guys said. So
Yeah.
I'll have more to say on other questions, I'm sure.
Okay.
I have a question from an emailer by email. Someone asked, how can I remain calm when I have a contamination OCD and am in quarantine with a roommate who has a cold and isn't worried about COVID-19?
Dean, you want to do
There you go, Dean.
Oh, wow.
We'll try.
Without knowing more about this person's particular situation and whether or not they're actively receiving treatment for their contamination concerns, or if they're on their trajectory to recovery, what we talked about at the beginning around uncertainty is an important one. And that is that, if there's reason to think that their roommate is merely suffering from a cold, and if they're, I guess, also potentially self-quarantining or engaging in all of the kind of safety measures that are necessary, and with one more caveat, that they are not in a risk group that would imperil them,
Yes.
then they may need to really practice some of the very same things that they might have if they've previously gotten treatment for contamination concerns.
Yep.
Now, of course, they don't need to go and contaminate themselves with their roommate and handle their, used tissues and things of that sort. But I think a measure of relapse prevention and maybe even an uptick in some of the basic exposural based practices that they may have been familiar with are clearly in order.
Yeah.
This is also a good time to reach out to past therapists if you're not in therapy anymore, and just say like, hey, I'm struggling with this idea of possibility versus probability. I know OCD latches on to just the possibility that my roommate has coronavirus and I might get it. And like you said, is what really are their symptoms? Do they fall in a high risk category? What's really the more factual based probability? The only other thing I would encourage this person is one of the things that was brought up, my roommate doesn't seem concerned or is on another page. And this is where I think all of us are going to be practicing this, living in like quarters, with people who maybe sometimes they get along with splendidly and other times they don't. So I'm at my parents right now. The night before I came out, my parents did a toast and they said, may we enjoy Simona, which is my daughter, their grandchild, and may we survive Rebecca. And that's because I think they know, like, who put us all in the same house. And I guess I'm a force to be reckoned with. But part of it is I think we're trying to practice what we call as like collaborative problem solving and collaborative communication.
Yep.
And I think that's what you're going to have to practice also with your roommate, like sitting down and talking to them and doing something what I call like fact, feeling, fair requests. Is state of fact. When I see you sniffling and sneezing and leaving your tissues around, I feel extremely anxious and dysregulated because everything going around with coronavirus and my OCD, I'm just on high alert. So I would like, and this has got to be a fair request. So I would like you to stay in your room and not touch anything is not necessarily a fair request, but a fair request is I'd like you to understand how tough this is for me. A fair request is I'd like us to sit down and maybe like come up with some like house rules that we both feel comfortable with. And that's where I would sort of lead. And I think there are going to be a lot of situations, whether you have OCD or not, that you're going to have to practice this type of communication and always thinking about, is my request fair? And also expressing my feelings as you start to figure out what are sort of the ways that we all interact in this house together. So
yeah. Very good points.
Elliot, do you want me to read? I'll read. Elliot had sent me a question that I think is great. So one of the realities right now is that some people aren't able to work from home, or that the jobs that they work at, either they're temporarily laid off or if their contract work, it's not happening. And so this worry about lost income is, what can people do around kids to either still give a sense of, reassurance and that everything's going to be okay, and helping manage their own worries. And so it doesn't rub off on their children when there's this very real reality of loss of income.
Well, that's a very tough one for many because, just thinking about some of the things to think about, people who clean houses, for example.
Yep.
These people are at a very high financial risk because they're not getting paid because folks aren't letting them come into the home. And so what do they say to their kids? The reality is they're not getting that income. And similar kinds of positions where people have been furloughed without any pay. It may be a stretch. There's many families who tend to live, who live paycheck to paycheck for many reasons. And live without health care. So what we have to say to the kids, I think at this point, is right now there's a temporary situation going on where it's going to be stressful. Mom or dad are out of work. We're going to be home, and we have to conserve. And we know it's going to end. We're not sure when, but it's sometime by the summer or in the summer, we're going to see things get better again. And so let's talk about what we can give up and come together about what can we give up, and what are the things that we can do together to make things easier. And so it could be, quite frankly, that baking or making more meals rather than going out, or, you know, calling Seamless, or, you know, things like that. The kids can understand that pitching in and helping and doing some of these things, making pizza yourself, and they might not come out well, as opposed to ordering pizza. These are all things, though, that are practical and reasonable to help pitch in. And then the other thing there too is it helps kids to understand why mom or dad might be more irritable a little bit. And it's just because we're used to going to work, and we've got to get back to work at some point, and we're waiting to hear when. So we all have to like work with one another a little bit at home to make sure we're pitching in so that we're not all stressed. It's okay to have those conversations, and we should. Yeah. And I think on a related note there, for those who do have means, helping to pitch in and, you know, think about your people who maybe do clean your home. Think about folks who, you know, somehow you contract with them for services in various ways. If you can help them out a little bit, you know, it would be appreciated. We need to think about people working in grocery stores who we take for granted, but they're on the front lines in a way very similar to our doctors and nurses and EMTs and such. You know, they're not going home because they need the job, but also they're there to keep the food and the toilet paper stocked and everything else that people are running in to buy out, and they're at high risk. Yeah. So we need to be, this is where Jonathan came in from the beginning, know our values, be much more connected and mindful about where can we help and how can we cut back when we need to for our own family's well-being.
Yeah, I would say the people who can actually activate that social justice sort of value, and on the flip of it, I think this question is so important at reminding us, like, this is something we should be incorporating in whatever way on a daily basis, whether we're you know, contacting people who do make like larger financial decisions and sort of voicing that this is a priority for us, as well as other priorities we've been voicing, as whether it's trying to Venmo money to people just because we sort of know that what they're in, making sure we pay our nannies well in advance, making sure we're paying our cleaning staff way in advance, really sort of activating that part. For the person who asked this question though, I think you did sort of the first part of my advice or recommendation is you spoke up and you said something and you like asked for help. I think in these situations is knowing you don't have to shoulder this all on your own, that there really are so many of us out here who we aren't perfect in knowing how we can help you, but we want to help you, whether it be just being on the receiving end of a stressful conversation, whether sort of trying to do some research within our community, who does, like what food banks are open, what free resources are out there, even if it's activities for kids, what are free, sort of knowing that is, I just sort of want to give you permission to say is talk to everybody and let people know sort of what your worries are and what your fears are, because there is no shame right now in sort of like asking for help in these situations. This is something that I think at the end of the day, we're collectively all sort of in it together, and we just, let people know if you need help. I think that, and what a great model, because at the end of the day, to have raising successful humans is they're going to have to ask for help at some point in their life. That's the only reason why I'm a successful human, is I've gotten help from people. So we're semi-successful, all that asterisk on. Yeah. I'm wondering, Elliot's not there, and I don't have other questions yet from people. Let's see if can you guys think of your own questions that maybe, and I'll go onto Twitter and Facebook and see if there are questions coming.
Well, how about adult relationships?
Yes, I was actually thinking, that's great.
All right, I'm going to throw it out to the guys. Let's get Jonathan and Dean opining on, you're home with your spouse now all day long. It's different than usually going out to work. So what do you do? How do you get along? How do you make it work?
Well, you know, I get to practice it every summer because, I work in a traditional academic setting. And so
Yeah.
I have summers off. And so also I've said out loud to many people, my wife and I actually really like hanging out together. And so this has not been a trial for us really at all.
I know. I see your
Yeah.
Facebook
And
posts all
so,
the time.
yeah. So,
You're like teenagers.
we really have a good time together. We've been married for, it'll be 28 years this year, but we have fun together. So, I hope that more spouses can connect with one another if they have, let's say not gotten to know each other as well as they would have liked, given that they work busy, they have busy schedules and have busy lives. But I may not be the best person to ask about this because I feel like I'm pretty well adapted on this topic. So I'm sorry. I know there's probably people out there watching this that hate me now. So I really apologize. I really do.
No, you're looking very sweet, Dean. You are. That's lovely. Jonathan, you want to jump in?
Sure. Like depending on people's constellation at home, it's obviously going to look differently. So if you have two working parents and you have the kids at home, like it is in our household, like we're taking turns, like kind of monitoring the kids and doing work. And so in some ways, like, our interaction is a little bit more than usual, but it's not like we're on top of each other all the time, right? But having said that, like there is an invitation to return to values, to return to try to connect if that hasn't been something that's been going on for a while, like maybe in part because the busyness of lives or outside stressors, to come together over that, right? And I like the idea actually of coming together over things just beyond the practicalities, right? So it's not just about how are we going to do our work together, or how are we going to, like, what are we going to do with the kids' schedules together, right? Anne Marie, I love your example of playing cards every night. It's like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, it's really, it's our way of relaxing. So, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we should bear in mind too, and as much as this has disrupted kids and, for the college kids, it was supposed to be spring break and various things, when we think about it as adults and the responsibilities that we have, one is, of course, our jobs are disruptive. And for some people that, it is a hit financially. The second thing, it's tax season.
Yes.
And this, in and of itself, this is a stressful time of year for many. Even just getting the taxes done is stressful, and getting them in on time and so forth. So, you have that there. We've also come off of, in many spots in the country, it hasn't been the typical season. I know Dean, again, I'm going to go to Dean. I love watching, and the two of us compare our cross-country skiing in the winter, for example. We haven't been able to do that. So there may be different things that just have been out of sync with how usually couples and families expend energy. So there's a lot of things that have been maybe a bit off. So we need to listen to one another. And, again, check your own irritability or your own anxiety while you're listening to your partner. Validate whatever they're experiencing is real, right? And just as important as what you're experiencing. And then a lot of the good, information we got, Rebecca, Jonathan, Dean, you've all said, and then try to come together around, okay, what can we share to move forward and, and make things work for us here at this time. And I'm going to say something else to everyone. Be romantic. Be romantic, find, that special dinner together that you make, and you set the table and so on, and do all kinds of romantic stuff, because, hey, if you're home, do it. Here you are. Have a good time.
Yeah.
Well, what you're bringing up, Anne-Marie, it's a great point. And I agree that, that's something that as people get very busy, especially with young children, they sometimes lose sight of these important parts about being a couple. And, it dovetails with something that, whenever I'm treating kids kids who have anxiety problems, and when I talk to the parents, one of the things that I often ask is, whether or not they still have date night or if they get a chance to spend any time at all alone. And it may indeed be more challenging to do that now, but certainly to cordon off time. And again, it may require, if you're out of practice with doing this, or because, you're really just trying to make it through the day and you're so busy, but really to make a priority of at least devoting 10 or 15 minutes to talking to one another, where it's just the two of you, uninterrupted time. And it could be about anything, whether it's about your day, about the work that you're doing, or about things that are a concern of yours. That alone time is so crucial. And to try and remember that the two of you got married or are in a committed relationship together. If you're not married, you got that way for a reason. And you got that way for the reason, probably, I would hope, is that you liked each other a lot. And so to try and make a point of reminding yourselves of that in some small way every single day.
Yeah. I have a question
Oh,
here.
I'm gonna make just a couple quick comments before we just move on. So 3 quick things I guess I would say is, one thing is, if at the end of the day you're so exhausted that you're even like, what do I talk about with my partner? How do I reconnect? So I'm going to give you something quick and easy. Google 36 questions to ask to fall in love. It's actually based out of some really cool research that was done from Stony Brook University, how you can put 2 strangers together and basically ask these questions and get 2 strangers to feel feelings of love. So they're proven to work, but even more, I've done it just with patients, not to get patients to fall in love with me, but more just because they spur in conversations and these ideas of opening. And they're really nice, just conversational questions. And that way you don't have to think of questions. Just Google that, 36 questions to fall in love. The other thing that I was going to say is, so I'm divorced. So I'm going to give permission to all these people out there. You don't have to be romantic with your partner. You don't have to reconnect. If your marriage was miserable before quarantine, this is not the time for you to put expectations on yourself that you should magically like resurrect your relationship. It's okay to effing hate his guts right now. And that's okay. Just find a way to live through it. Because we fall into these traps where everybody's life looks perfect on social media. And I bet you for like the first week, everybody's like Instagram and Facebook posts and Twitter posts are going to be like these magical social distancing, quarantine, like life is so wonderful, when so many of us are actually miserable off social media. And just take the pressure off of yourself that this doesn't have to be Anne-Marie and Dean and Jonathan's relationship.
Sorry.
No. I think it's wonderful.
I'm sure we'll be fighting by the end of the week.
No. But I mean, also taking that pressure off. It doesn't have to be that. And then the third thing is, so I am a single mom. And I did that was one of the reasons why I made the decision to not be at home and come to my parents. I felt like I didn't want to be the only adult in the room at the end of the day for a month or 2 weeks. And so I would say, seriously thinking about that, if you are a single parent, or if you are still, you have no options to go anywhere else, which I think a large majority of people don't have that option, is please use your networks. Please talk to your friends. Please, there are a lot of single parent groups out there where I think people are really sharing their experiences. And even in the neighborhood, again, if you know that you've sort of been quarantined and safe and they have too, there can be ways that maybe in a few days or a week, you can build in another single parent who's in the neighborhood, and you can sort of like get together and sort of tag team in the way Jonathan and his, spouse have been tag teaming together. And that's another possibility, just to think about this in this relationship sort of way. All right, now let's get to your question.
Yeah. So Hunter
Oh,
asked about how about relationships with older persons and family members? And I would tag on to that, maybe people who are alone or people who are ill. So, how do you reach out? What do we do for these folks? Because we don't want people to be forgotten. And I will also add individuals with serious mental illnesses who are often forgotten, and many times homeless or out, just left alone because people are frightened. So let me hear your thoughts about that. Thank you, Hunter, for bringing that up.
I mean, I guess I'm seeing from a lot of patients who like live alone and who are single, they're already feeling this, that in the ways that they used to be connected, they would go out to eat or they would go to the coffee shop or they would go to the bar. And this is really, really tough for them, especially for some of the people I work with. They have a very, very small social circle to begin with. So it's not like they have, you know, they can just endlessly pick up the phone and call people. I think in some ways, my advice has been now starting to give to people is still do reach out to the people that you are connected with. Do reach out to your therapist if you have one. And I think we're probably going to come together as a community and try to think of creatively, how can we create like online support groups and things like that for people who are alone. Another thing that I would say is it's old fashioned, but like journaling is also a really nice way to just in those sort of down times or those alone times to still journal, I think, and sort of talk to yourself or talk to these other people in your journal. And then I would say there's a really interesting meditation called the loving kindness meditation, which really can help you feel connected to the people that you care about, but even to the larger world. And that's something that I would encourage people experimenting and trying for if you're alone in your apartment and you have this downtime. Those are things that practically I think people can do. So.
Yeah, and I think also like if you're close to people who are older or are sick in some way, like letting them know through a phone call or a message that they're not forgotten and they're connected. And Marie, I loved your idea of like having kids write cards or draw pictures, right? As far as we know, the mail is still working, right? It's like real old fashioned, but it works, right? So we might encourage people to do that, to really like affirm those connections in ways that help people not feel so lonely and isolated, right? And really cared for and loved.
Yeah.
There are also some community-based organizations that are fostering online connectivity. And so, you know, it may be just a short step to investigate what your local community may have. There's also, you know, there's this now, it's called the virtual field trip. Now, I know it's kind of geared more towards like high schoolers, but some of them are to places that really anybody would go to. Like a couple of them sound very appealing to me. There's virtual field trip to Yellowstone National Park, other national parks. And it's basically like a guided tour and it's run by different experts for that community. And so and it's engaging. It's not just, you know, like a video tour via like a recording. They're actually live, ongoing, engaged kinds of tours, so to speak. So there's a number of different ways that that people can be less isolated. It's not going to be necessarily a full replacement for actual physical contact with another human, but it may be the kind of approximation that will allow people to be able to get through this difficult period.
And I think there are also online courses. I mean, a lot of older people will do lifelong learning and the Great Book Society meetups and things like that. But in replacing those, because I know they're canceling, the Ivy Leagues actually have courses, and a lot of them are free that you can take online. So that may be something that if they have them, there's a group wise. And I would imagine if you know meetup.com, I can't imagine they're not doing some online types of meetups. So I would investigate that. But I think the other thing is we should think about how can you connect with places like Fountain House in New York City, which serves, it's like a clubhouse for seriously mentally ill. What are organizations local to your community that you might be able to send things over to? Maybe they have ways that they're connecting with their members or others who would otherwise be forgotten. The National Alliance for the Mentally Ill, Mental Health America. If you look and see what the local chapters are, they may have ways of, even if you bake cookies, that they would pick them up and deliver them to people. You know, these kinds of things can be done. Same thing with nursing homes. Call ahead, and they are scheduling ways for families to visit or also to get things delivered to family members that are in the nursing homes.
Yeah. I would also say call your local representative, because they tend to know what's going on in your community the best, and ways that you can help people, whether it be like grocery shop or even call a phone number. Is I would call your local representative, your state representative. They're probably going to know sort of what are organizations that are already in play, that are very, very local. Yeah. Great. I guess we're running out of time. So do people have sort of final thoughts, things that you said, like, we didn't get to talk to this, or I want to make sure to add?
And Dean, you're muted.
Oh, there we go. I'm unmuted. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm not letting you off the hook.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank the folks who sent in, through my Facebook feed questions. And I know, this is a good test for us, the psychologists there's a lot of psychologists on my feed. I see you there.
Yeah.
For us to remember to reach out to, especially our clients who are more vulnerable.
Yeah.
But also just, a bit more kindness and compassion and flexibility is going to go a long way over these next several weeks or months.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
And this is going to be recorded, and it should be at the same place that you came on for the webinar. So feel free to share it. I don't know how quickly it gets turned around, and Elliot turns it around pretty quickly. And I would say is, if there are questions, we'll find a way for people to add additional questions, just in case there are resources that we can connect people to. So yeah. So thank you guys for joining out there, audience that we don't get to see. And thank you guys all for making this happen. And yeah, we will.
Rebecca, for organizing this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, my pleasure. This came together quickly. It was nice.
Thank you.
Okay. Very good.
All
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.